should have a full house here. Just to start things off, my name is Andrew Farrelly. I'm the CEO of CT Strategies. It is my pleasure to be with you all today, to be with this distinguished panel, and to help all of you to fulfill your needs when it comes to the CTPAT program. As you all know, one of the key aspects to the program is training. And more often than not, most companies do training, but it is critical to assess that training against the requirements specifically of the CTPAT program. Hopefully today you'll get some insight into how to do that and be better prepared for your engagement with the CTPAT program with your supply chain security specialists and the requirements that they may ask you to fulfill. Obviously, in a 2-hour session, we can't cover every nuance of every part of the program, but with our experienced panel who have been supply chain security specialists themselves, have been field managers, field directors, and all of them at one point or another were acting or a full-time director of the national program. I think you'll find some things to take away from this, and hopefully you'll be entertained by their stories. I hear them all the time myself, and I still am entertained every time I hear them. As we talk about not covering every nuance, the other thing to just keep in your mind, and it's something that a lot of people forget when they engage in the CTPAT program, is to be flexible. The flexibility of the program at a very high level. The program was started and continues to be an intended partnership with you all, with the members, and not every member does everything the same. And meeting the requirements is a flexible approach that requires and achieves a certain minimum criteria, but it is not done the same in every single business. So this training today is designed to help you apply the best practices and the things that we see to your particular supply chain security efforts, and to be better members of the CTPAT program. Also, a few things before I turn it over to the panel. Just some admin things to be aware of. During this webinar, we're going to take answers. We're going to take questions and hopefully answer all your concerns. Please put them in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that. It'll be my job as the moderator to interrupt the panelists to ask some particular questions that are appropriate for different sections. But also we're going to leave some time at the end to try to answer as many questions as there are out there. The other thing I just want to make everybody aware, this is the first, we're doing 2 webinars. This one is in English. Next week on Tuesday is in Spanish. If anyone, si alguien está aquí para el programa en español, vamos a tener el mismo el martes que viene, la misma hora. Y si necesita cambiar el programa desde hoy al martes que viene, por favor nos avisan y podemos ayudarle bueno, después del webinar o antes del webinar del próximo martes. Entonces, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I will turn it over to Ron May to give you a quick introduction about himself and then get into the meat of what we all came here for. So, Ron, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. I kind of like the idea when you said give us an answer. I think the Jeopardy format would be very valuable in here as opposed to just spitting out questions. But one thing I did want to, before we get into anything, we start and we talk about training and everybody's like, what do I got to do for CTPAT? What do they want? Remember that the importance of training isn't only to satisfy CTPAT, it's also to ensure safety and operational efficiency. So make sure the training edict, the training philosophy isn't just, is this enough for CTPAT? It's actually covering very important elements that your employees and your operations need to have. So with that, I've been given the task of kind of just going over a little bit. I'm sure a lot of us have heard about this. The CTPAT program has been around a very long time. It obviously came out of 9/11. A couple things that are important to remember. You see some of the statistics, over 11,000 members, over half of all trade. Remember why it was started, for security. And remember that the U.S. was the only one who had this. Now, as time has come on, we're seeing the globalization of this concept, the authorized economic operator, which we'll talk about. But I think that's an important point to talk about and remember the origin of the program. Pushing out the borders, extending the range of CBP, so it's just not at a port; it's actually outside of the borders. Over 20 years in existence, pushing that now. Good news is it still remains non-regulatory. That flexibility allows the program to apply to big, small entities. It does allow for some challenges. I think one of the things that we're all very much aware of, those of us who have participated in the program, the flexibility allows for some administrative individualism, I'll put it that way, some uniqueness in the way certain offices or SCSSs apply the program. But I think in the end, allowing that flexibility, not making it regulatory to this point, allows for the program to adapt and for the members to adapt to the needs of the program. So again, evolution of the program started for security. Remember too, you see the list of who could participate now. That always wasn't everyone you see. 3PL and some of the other ones came along later. And that's part of the updating and changing of the program. And to be very frank, the program kind of stayed static for a number of years. But recently, we've seen the new minimum security criteria that evolved. We're seeing issues come out that the program is dealing with, such as forced labor, such as the uptick in the concern for fentanyl. Also, we see the mutual recognition that has come out and pushed, and very, very important, not only for you as a company, but for CBP as a customs administration to be able to engage with others around the world and again, extend that reach and knowledge of what supply chains are. I'm sure there's more on the way. I think this is obviously a bit of a long time coming with the MSC changing, and you're seeing more things as they become important to CBP and the trade and supply chains. CTPAT embraces them. I've always said in many ways, the trade is outpacing the government and CTPAT and how the supply chain evolves. And I think that's one of the challenges for the program, is to continue to maneuver itself to keep up with those changes. So a lot to talk about. I'll stop there. I'm going to throw it back to my good colleague, Sean, who's going to talk about some risk analysis issues.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate that. I thought it was funny when you said that in many ways the private sector is ahead of the government. Anybody on the call who's dealt with the IRS office at any point in their life knows that there's absolutely no way the government is leading the charge on getting anything done quickly. So that resonated with me, at least. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. If I could just echo Andrew's comments. So risk analysis, risk management, risk assessment, we hear all of these constantly when we're discussing CTPAT. First, let's recognize the elephant in the room. And Ron mentioned it, but just to highlight it a bit more, the elephant in the room is that when the CTPAT program started 20 years ago, it was an anti-terrorism program in response to 9/11. But as we've seen over time, the scope has certainly expanded well past that original intent. So that said, we can debate whether or not there's been a slow sort of bait and switch over the requirements over the years. But the bottom line is the requirements are the requirements, right? So if you're in the program, you've got to meet those requirements. But from a member perspective, there's a lot of non-terrorism risks and threats which are incredibly relevant to companies, and of course, if they're left unchecked, they can have catastrophic consequences. So therefore, it's certainly in your best interest to consider all of the risks and threats, regardless of CTPAT and the minimum security requirements. Now, from a training perspective, absolutely not everyone in a particular organization needs to be trained in how to conduct risk assessments, but it is important that all of your employees, all of the employees, are made aware of what types of risks are out there so that they can be best equipped to serve as a force multiplier to your security culture. Some staff that would need specific training or more focused training for these processes, maybe staff that's handling sensitive business information, perhaps human resources, those involved in sourcing and acquisition of new business partners, and so on. Additionally, there's risks to be aware of for trade compliance. My colleague Brad's going to talk about a couple of those a little later in the conversation. But let's focus on one of the most important tools used in the risk assessment process, which is the business partner questionnaire. So the staff responsible for creating, distributing, collecting, and acting upon the findings in the security questionnaire should be and need to be trained to understand the nuances of that process. We often hear that, we hear from companies that they have trouble getting business partner questionnaires completed, right, by those business partners. This is, unfortunately, this is actually a very, very common issue, and something that actually can be mitigated in many ways. The reality is that, companies typically don't have the time or the patience to dedicate to this process. One of the issues is that many of the CTPAT members send out a questionnaire which is nothing but the entirety of the MSC, which everyone on the call should be aware of. I mean, that's a pretty comprehensive list of requirements. You can refine those business partner questionnaires by grouping themes, removing some questions which may not be applicable to that particular business partner, et cetera. So you really want to reduce that down, boil that down to the bare minimum of what you need to know from that business partner to feed into your overall risk assessment. The shorter you can make that questionnaire while still being effective, the more successful you will be in getting your business partners to complete it in a timely manner. Now, for continuous monitoring and particularly in cases where companies have a large number of business partners, you can do a couple things. So annually, you can ask business partners if they've made any changes since they filled out the questionnaire in the previous year. If the answer is no, you can move on with consideration to the overall risk in that particular supply chain. Other factors from the previous year may indicate that a higher level of risk is now seen in that supply chain, and you may want to ask additional questions of those business partners. So you have to weigh all this out in the totality of the situation. If your process is to ask for a new questionnaire to be completed every year, and you have a large number of business partners, you can make that request to a subgroup or a sample of your business partners based on risk, so that you don't have to go through the process, for the entirety of all of your business partners. Eventually, you'll get to all of them with that methodology, but you'll do it piece by piece based on risk. Okay, so maybe we can move to the risk assessment slide. Let me talk a bit about the specific risk assessment process. So the minimum security criteria 2.1 states that CTPAT members must conduct and document the amount of risk in their supply chains and must conduct an overall risk assessment to identify where vulnerabilities may exist, security vulnerabilities specifically. The overall risk assessment, remember, is made up of two key parts. It's a self-assessment of the member's supply chain, their security practices, procedures, and policies within the facilities that it controls, and then an international risk assessment to identify threats based on a member's business model and roles in the supply chain. And the information that you gather from that business partner questionnaire feeds in to that information. So CTPAT, I think everybody is probably familiar. They promote a 5-step risk assessment process, which is very good. It's comprehensive, but remember, it's not a requirement. It's a requirement that you do a comprehensive risk assessment and that it includes certain elements. But by no means do you have to feel obligated to use that specific example that they use. Ultimately, the staffs within your organization responsible for assessing risk in the supply chain should understand the components of a risk assessment and the components specifically of the CTPAT risk assessment process. So looking through the lens of the CTPAT recommended process, the staff responsible should understand and should be trained in how to map the flow of cargo, which should identify each node and the associated time it takes to identify cargo at rest moments, which raise the profile. CBP kind of preaches that mantra a lot, which is, cargo at rest is cargo at risk. As it's moving, it's as long as it's moving, it's a lower risk profile. So that's the key aspect of that cargo mapping process. They should understand how and why and which threats may be present. They should understand how these factors come together to reveal vulnerabilities and what corrective actions need to be taken to mitigate the associated risk. Now, I can tell you, maybe I rephrase that, I probably can't tell you how many times I speak with companies who think that they have a sufficient cargo map, and that goes something like, our shipments come from our supplier in, say, Peru, and they arrive at the port of Newark, Elizabeth, and our shipping company, by the way, is CTPAT, so we have nothing to worry about. That really tells me and the program and the supply chain security specialist very little about the associated risk in your supply chain. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that in this type of example, it's clear that the staff involved in the risk assessment either doesn't understand the process because they weren't trained to understand the process correctly, or perhaps there's not a lot of upper management support and they don't really care too much to understand the process. Either one of those could be a factor, or both of those could be a factor. So my colleagues and I, we could go on for hours telling war stories about massive drug seizures that we witnessed in our time at CBP, but the reality is that this stuff is happening every single day. And companies who fail to train key personnel on effective risk assessment methodologies are certainly putting themselves at greater risk than, hypothetically at least, a lot of your competitors that are taking the proper steps. So, certainly from a business opportunity perspective, you want to make sure that you're insulating yourself as much as possible from security incidents, which would be a negative criteria for business partners looking to select secure supply chain partners. So it's through that risk assessment that you can effectively mitigate the higher risk aspects of your operation by implementing additional security protocols. And of course, that can often be a moving target, which requires flexibility. And Ron talked about that flexibility. And those are opportunities where you may identify something and you may say, okay, we could do these 3 things, but I'm not sure which one we should do. I don't know how CBP is going to react to this. Call up your supply chain security specialist. Say, hey, we've identified this heightened risk area in one of our supply chains. This is how we're looking to mitigate it. What do you think? What else have you seen out there? So by all means, utilize the program assets to help improve your training in any aspect of the minimum security criteria. So let me just give an example. It's probably a bit extreme example, but I think it's quite simple actually in terms of describing this. So years ago, I did a validation on a firearms manufacturer in Brazil. And due to the high value of the commodity, obviously, coupled with a lot of organized crime operations in the area and the transit time for the trucks to go from the factory to the port, the risk of hijacking there is extremely high. So to mitigate that risk, every single shipment is escorted by heavily armed security forces. Additionally, they constantly change the times and the routes of those transports to reduce the predictability of the process. So again, it's a bit of an extreme example, but I think it clearly displays how the risk assessment can be applied to the operation. Additionally, this example, in this example, certainly you could take lessons learned from those operations. You know, maybe particular routes became troublesome, or particular times became troublesome. You could feed that information back into the process to constantly evolve it and improve it, and obviously the associated training that would go along with those changes to the process. So I think you've heard me drone on enough about risk assessment. I think I'll flip it back to you, Ron.
No, very interesting, Sean. And a couple things that all of us, I learned right away when I was with CTPAT, is the uniqueness of supply chains and how different they are. You know, I think one of the challenges and why supply chain security specialists are so well thought of is one day is auto parts, the next day is wearing apparel, the next day is pharmaceutical, the next day is food. It's very difficult to understand the complexities of those individual supply chains, even when they're the same mode, trucking and or air or maritime in the same supply chain can be unique. One of the things I learned with pharma is obviously as you put those materials out on the tarmac, they can't be out exposed to heat and other things, other concerns that you have. So the uniqueness, the complexity of individual supply chains, that's one of the reasons what Sean's talking about. And one of the things we're about to talk about now is the importance of business partners. Business partners are your supply chain. And I think, frankly, in my opinion, this is one of the more essential elements that CBP and CTPAT need from you, is understanding who's in your supply chain. Who are these partners that are providers for you, and what do they do? One of the things that happened in the old days is, oh, okay, who's your highway carrier? Oh, it's such and such. Well, how do they load your goods? Oh, that's their problem. We pay them for that. That's the wrong answer. That's what this is all about. Understanding the process, understanding what goes on. That supply chain transparency. You know, everything from how do they vet their staff? Where do they store their trucks? You know, what do they do with a loaded truck? Where all that's important. I also, this is one of my favorite stories. I've told it, and I'm sure some of you have heard it from me before, but it was an early supply chain validation that I did in Jakarta, Indonesia. Very unique place in the world, very challenged with infrastructure and other things. And I'm riding in the back seat of this company vehicle with a gentleman, and I'm looking around, and it's such a tough place to do business. There's no stoplights. There's just a lot of challenges. And I asked him, I said, why are you sourcing from here? And he turned around to me and he went like this. And he goes, 4 cents a unit. That was it. That was the whole reason you listen to Sean's risk analysis and selection of business partners. It was the cheapest. Okay, that's one of the ways you'll choose your partners, but that may not be the most secure and the most efficient way. So that's some of the things we're talking about, some of the things that we need to think about. You see on this list, and I'm not going to read it to you, but background checks, making sure the company is financially stable, that they have no issues, whether criminal or civil. There's security requirements. How are things done? What procedures and processes do they follow? Use of the questionnaire. And one of the comments I want to make about the questionnaire, a lot of companies will send them out, and a company will send it back and say, we're CTPAT, so therefore I don't need to answer your questions. I understand the response and questionnaires sometimes can be, have a lot of information, but remember, not everyone does the same thing to satisfy a requirement. Some facilities will store empty trucks, empty trailers on their facility. Some won't. Some will do instant loads, some won't. That's information about your business partners, about your providers, that help you establish levels of risk. That's why the questionnaire and answering some of that information is so important. We have a template example that we wanted to show. Very busy, a lot on there. By no means is this what you have to do for every questionnaire. These are some suggestions about what you want. Obviously, getting information about your provider, information about who they are, how long they've been in business, what they do, not just that they're the lowest price provider in the area. Also, you can see there's a section to secure AEO information. Very important. An authorized economic operator who successfully participates in one of those programs can bring you a lot of street cred, a lot of assistance in your not only CTPAT, but in your operational efficiency in the supply chain, because now it's getting that accreditation from multiple customs administrations, not just one. The biggest issue, I think, with these questionnaires that we see is failure to complete them or failure to return them. And we run into that all the time. What do I do? Well, this is where we start to talk about the leverage that you have with your business partners. You're engaging them contractually. We know that many companies will not do business now with other entities unless they are CTPAT AEO certified. They won't even enter into a contract. If they don't satisfy those requirements showing that, they're in breach. So I think one of the things is conveying the importance of you're a provider, you're a partner of mine. You can elicit success or failure in our supply chain. You think all of the bad scenarios. You know, my product is in a truck and the truck has an incident, it blows up somewhere, God forbid, and there's a problem. The stigma related to that truck and will now attach itself to the brand equity. And another thing I've said all my years of CTPAT and CBP, how important brand equity is, the reputation of your industry and your company. Your company depends on the reputation, on the operational efficiency, on the safety of your providers. You are what your providers make you. And I think that's one of the things that's so important about these questionnaires. Some of the other ways, so we get a lot of companies, they say, well, as I look at my business partner and I do the things you're saying, and I try to get some audits or assessments, it's expensive to just do a CTPAT audit. Well, one of the things we say is you do on-site quality assurance visits, combine them with a security assessment. There's no reason that someone who's looking for quality control can't also see, are they wearing their IDs? Are the doors locked? What's the access controls? Make it a communal function. Don't make it just a one-off security. And I think that helps to kind of ease some of the burden of having individualized trips. We talk about internal and external audits that are performed. CBP and CTPAT are very interested in seeing documented internal and external audits that are performed to show compliance with the criteria or other security procedures and processes. Then another thing that I think is not used a lot is customer reviews. What are the customers of these providers saying? How happy are they with the service? What's happened while they've engaged them separately? And I think this due diligence that you're trying to do, Sean's discussion with risk analysis, combined with your efforts to vet your business partners, ensure that your supply chain is fully functional, fully capable, and fully efficient. I think this is one of the things that's coming out, whether it's procurement, whether it's ensuring that what's delivered is delivered. You know, we talk about OS&D a lot of times. That's just as important as something that's put in a container that's not supposed to be there. So overall, I think one of the most important things we're trying to get through here is know who your business partners are. This is something CTPAT and the SCSS are very concerned about. Do you know who your providers are? How do you keep in touch with them? How do you maintain documentation of their compliance with criteria? So again, hopefully that makes sense and it gives you some insight into what we were looking for. I think with this, I know some of you had questions about some of these comments, but I'm going to turn it over to Brad and he's going to talk about social compliance and money laundering.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Good afternoon, colleagues from Houston. In these next couple of slides, I'll try to address a couple of the questions, but Ron, Sean, we may want to tease some of that out as we go along. So Sean has spoken to the risk assessment process, the fundamental steps that a company needs to go through. And of course, Ron just finished talking about knowing your business partners and screening them to ensure that they're bona fides, that they're a reputable business partner. Two specific risk factors that should be included in these processes are forced labor and trade-based money laundering. CBP and CTPAT have put quite a bit of emphasis on both of these areas over the last couple of years. So we're going to talk in a little more detail about each of them. So with respect to forced labor, social compliance, kind of several points I want to get across to the audience. First of all, and this goes to the culture of CTPAT as CBP's premier industry partnership program. It only makes sense that CTPAT members are well situated to identify and prevent forced labor in their supply chains. And the expectation is members will use their leverage, use their the strength of contracts and others to prevent social forced labor throughout their supply chain. In section 3.9 of the minimum security criteria, it states that business partners should have, must have a documented social compliance program in place that a minimum addresses how the company ensures goods imported in the United States were not mined, produced, or manufactured wholly or in part with prohibited forms of labor, indentured imprisonment, or child labor. CTPAT defines a social compliance program as a set of policies and practices through which a company seeks to ensure maximum compliance with the elements of its code of conduct, and that covers forced labor throughout its supply chain. I'm sure most companies have some sort of social compliance program in place, and so expect that your supply chain specialist is going to ask to see it and ask about how forced labor is incorporated and how you build awareness throughout your business partners and the areas that you do business. The second point, the enforcement of forced labor, it's not new for CBP. There's been a law in the book since 1930, the Tariff Act of 1930, that gives the legal foundation for the federal government, CBP, to enforce forced labor. Here over the last couple of years, there's been some additional legislation to give CBP some tools, additional tools, the Trade Facilitation Enforcement Act in 2016, and the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that just came out within the last couple of years provide more weight, makes it more easier for CBP to enforce social compliance and forced labor. CBP's process is pretty straightforward. They'll receive an allegation of forced labor, they'll investigate it, they'll conduct their own assessment. If they find that forced labor is specific to a company, they will issue a detention order. And if that detention order, if the company is not able to show that they were not using forced labor for that particular supply chain, they will in fact move to seizure of the goods. Forced labor, there's 4 key elements. It includes any type of work or service. It can include anyone, age, gender. There has to be an example. There has to be a threat through intimidation or subtle means such as accumulated debt, withholding identity documents, or threats to the employee if they report to authorities. and a lack of free movement to leave the facility, to end their work relationship. There has to be that threat aspect of that. There are many indicators of social forced labor that companies should be thinking about. Excessive overtime for workers, low payment or non-delivery of promised salaries, creating a debt in exchange of services, poor, dangerous working conditions, threats to the employees, retaining their passports or other identification documents. So what can companies do as it relates to forced labor? Well, certainly, and as we've talked about so far, build forced labor into your risk assessment process. Look to see if you're sourcing goods from a particular part of the world where there is a detention order. I mentioned the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, the Zhejiang province, North China. Of the 50 or so, 55 detention orders, over half come from that particular area. So you want to identify risks based upon geographic areas, provide training to employees regarding forced labor, the indications. If you do independent verifications of your suppliers, that should be an aspect of this as well. And then really just establishing forced labor as a part of your overall social compliance program and conducting due diligence, certainly. Which then takes me to the second risk factor, and that is trade-based money laundering. Trade-based money laundering is really using commercial international flow of goods to hide, to cover up illicit funds that come from drug smuggling or other nefarious activities. There are several examples of this. Usually it comes down to over or under invoicing the merchandise, misrepresenting the goods on the import documents, or even falsifying their descriptions, creating phantom shipments, substituting low value goods for higher value goods, or circuitous movement of goods, moving just the same product back and forth across the borders to avoid detection of money laundering. It's a growing threat. I know within Department of Homeland Security, our sister agency, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Homeland Security does a lot of work in this area. There is some TBML training materials in the CTPAT portal, that I had a chance to review as I was just thinking about comments for this particular session. So you could reference back to that. It's a deck that's in the portal that you might want to take a look at eventually. And really what CTPAT wants to ensure that the partners are thinking about TBML when they screen those business partners and looking for warning signs, such as, is the product coming from an area of the world, a geographical region that is known for narcotics smuggling? Is there multiple parties involved that may be shell companies? Multiple changes to the shipping documents, the letter of credit, or asking for quick turnarounds on product and to move it across the border. I think what CTPAT is really wants to ensure as part of training that those entities within your organization responsible for onboarding new clients, accounting and finance, have some awareness of these warning indicators, and that they can kind of review them against the client's information to see if anything stands out, if it requires further research. As respect to databases, and Sean and Ron, you may want to just jump in too. There is the consolidated terrorism screening database. I think that's commonly put out as one area of going to look at known terrorist identities. I not too long ago saw a note where some companies in Mexico were added to that particular list. So that's one additional resource I know to help establish the bona fides of your company. But and individual countries have their own databases as well. I think Mexico, which I'm more familiar with, has a database of that sort. So Sean, Ron, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on these 2 points, but if not, I'll flip it back over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Brad. No, just in terms of the open source information list, there are several out there that a lot provide similar information, some a little bit different information. We can and will share some of those resource links as part of the takeaways for this webinar, so that you're fully equipped with the tools that you need for success.
Hey, Sean, if I can
Yeah.
just real quick while you get ready to transition to stuff. Just on that point, there's been some questions both publicly and privately along those lines of what we're going to be sharing afterwards. So this was a great transition point. We'll be sending out recordings of the webinar, the slides, some templates I know have been asked for, as well as some of these resources and best practices. So the conversation can keep going back and forth, but we want to make sure you're as prepared as possible coming off this. So I appreciate all the questions, and sorry for the interruption, Sean. I know that breaks your flow, but I think you can get back to it.
Not at all. Not at all. It's a welcome disruption. It's fine. So let's discuss what's probably, I mean, at least in my opinion, the single most important aspect of the CTPAT membership requirements, which is really the security of the cargo itself. And if you think about the genesis of the program, that's the core of the program's need, really, is around the security of the movement of that cargo. So hopefully everyone is familiar with what we're seeing on the screen here, which is one of CTPAT's multi-point inspection processes. I say multi-point because there are several variations. This is the 7-point for dry containers, but there's also the 8-point for refrigerated containers, a 17-point for tractors and trailers, and my colleague Ron's going to run through a case study related to training that focuses on the 17-point aspect. And then now with the introduction of the agriculture security requirements, we're essentially creating a +1 scenario for all of these various inspections. So for the sake of time, let's focus on just the most common of these inspections, which is the 7-point container inspection. That's one that we always hear about. There's a reason why this inspection is so important, and that is because smugglers have and continue to use containers as one of their primary smuggling tools. And we can see some pictures on the screen here of smuggling of techniques. And many of you may be familiar with some images like this, or may not, from different training that's been provided through the years by different organizations, including CTPAT itself. But it's really important to include pictures and videos in your training, particularly when it comes to this inspection process. Conducting an effective inspection will significantly mitigate the risk, but the staff conducting these inspections, they need to be properly trained in not only how to conduct the inspections, but why. I mean, we see here on the left side there, that's looks like a false wall scenario. You can see the amount of narcotics or contraband that's been placed in there. I think we have some more slides here we can go to. You can see the frame has been compromised at the where the wall meets the roof. You can see a door, the natural void being compromised. Pretty much anything you can think of, and anywhere you can think of smuggling anything in a container has been done or will be done. You can see here, this is some smuggling techniques in the cargo itself to be aware of. And we have a lot of these pictures. We have more than we're displaying here. We can and will share those pictures for you to incorporate into your training regimen, because it just very much helps. So again, the key is that the staff that's conducting these inspections, they need to be properly trained, of course, yeah, in the methods and the methodology, but not only in how to conduct the inspections, but they need to be really trained in why they're conducting these inspections. The staff will be much more effective in executing the process if they fully understand the why. It's one thing, to train someone to check these 7 points, but it very much creates a different perspective when you train them on why as well. So your training should include photos and videos of smuggling attempts. Ideally, an example from each of those 7 points. So, the walls, the undercarriage, the roof, the back wall, the doors, the hardware. If you can support all of those points, the floor we're seeing here, the amount of you can only fathom how much weight and narcotics must be in that floor of that trailer there. So when the staff's looking for evidence of repairs or inconsistencies in the floor, for example, why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that because smugglers have and smugglers will fill the entire floor of a container with countless kilos of cocaine, for example, as we're seeing in this picture. Why are they measuring the interior length of the container? Because smugglers have and will use and construct a false wall to conceal contraband. So all this stuff is happening. There's a reason for that 7-point inspection, and it's critical that your staff that's doing that is trained in really, I would say, like the physical aspect and the philosophical aspect of that. I recently worked with a CTPAT company who had acquired several new business partners, and as part of their new business partner onboarding process, they provide them with some training, which included photos of how containers can be compromised. So, very much what you're seeing here is in this training that they provide to these new business partners. When I spoke to one of the representatives of one of the new business partners, he said to me, I had no idea that you could smuggle so much, drugs, contraband, whatever, in containers. The training really opened my eyes. So I can promise you that in that example, that gentleman will be much more effective, and his team will be much more effective in conducting container inspections than they were prior to receiving that training, because now their eyes and their mind have been opened up to the possibilities. Let me cover some more additional practical aspects related to the training of staff in conducting these inspections. So there's, as Andrew alluded to, there's just too many details to cover, obviously, within our allotted time. We probably could do a full day on many of these topics, but one of the takeaways that you'll be receiving is a list of the specific details related to the proper inspection of the 7 points. So it's one thing to have this checklist here to point it out, but it's also quite helpful for you to dig down a little bit deeper and have some information to help guide you in those 7 points. So we will provide that for you. For now, I'll just highlight some of those items. If we're talking about the outside and the undercarriage, You need to have that staff trained to physically look at the undercarriage by bending down underneath so that they can actually see, or they can use a mirror to check the the structural voids of the container. You want to make sure that the cross beams are visible, for example, and there hasn't been modifications to secrete contraband into those natural voids. In addition to walking the perimeter of the container to look for any suspicious indicators such as freshly painted areas or what appear to be new welds or welds which seem out of place, etc. It's a good idea to get a look at the roof or the top of the container as well to look for the same things. Inside and outside the doors. The doors can really be a telltale sign of other issues. So the container doors hardware can be modified and modified for smuggling, and the evidence of tampering here can indicate that a different part of the container was actually compromised. There was an example of a CTPAT member who, upon the arrival of the container, there was an indication on the vertical locking rods that it appeared that some of the hardware had been replaced because the metal didn't match. The part of the rod was new metal, the other part of the rod was older metal. There was no issues with the doors themselves, but what this did is it raised awareness. They married that up to data from the GPS and had identified that there may have been some unapproved stoppage of the vehicle. Anyway, long story short, the entire floor of that particular container had been compromised and loaded with narcotics. So don't just assume that when you're looking at one spot that indicates that there's something wrong with that spot. It could be a telltale sign of something wrong with another area of the container. In terms of the right side, left side, front wall, use a rubber mallet. This is a very simple tool. You can systematically bang the walls for changes in density. At the same time, you can visually inspect those walls for signs of alteration or repair. Additionally, for the front wall, this is when you can get out, you can measure the interior length to see if that false wall is present or not. It's important to know what those interior measurements are for the different types of containers. We'll provide that in the information sheet that we provide to you. The ceiling and the roof, using a steel or wooden pole, you systematically bang just like you would with that rubber mallet to hear for changes in density, and also at the same time, just like you did the walls, visually inspecting for any inconsistencies. Same thing with the floor. You're looking for differences and inconsistencies in colors or the material used on the floor, fastening hardware, if there's new fastening hardware and it doesn't match up with all the parts of the container or the floor, why is that? This is also probably the most relevant area related to the agriculture inspection for pest contamination. So that's one of those newer MSC requirements. So certainly while inspecting the interior, you're looking for signs of pests. There could be droppings or evidence of a nest or anything like that. Dead bugs, anything that stands out. That should be part of that inspection for sure. So let me kick it over to Ron for a moment. He's just going to give you share a little story about a 17-point inspection training exercise that stood out to him. Over to you, Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I think one of the things that I know Sean and I have found in the time we did validations, I don't know how many all over the world, a lot of times you see these forms, you see these 17-point inspection, 7-point inspection, and they're out at the dock or somewhere, and two things happen. One is they're there, they're in place, but no one's using it. And remember what the supply chain security specialist job is. They're going to go to those people and say, do you use this? And more than once, I've had a person say, no, I don't know what that form is, even though I was presented it as part of the validation. The other part of it is they fill it out, but don't do the inspection. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up here a colleague of mine and I were asked once to do a training for a Canadian highway carrier for some of their drivers. So we went out and did the training and talked about these things that Sean's talked about in the 17-point inspection. And the gentleman who brought us in says, that's a really great idea. He goes, but how am I supposed to make sure these guys are actually doing the inspection and not just signing it and giving it to me? And I said, that's a very good problem to bring up. His solution was he decided to start placing gift certificates to dinner or stores or other things in some of these 17-point areas you see. What he would do is put it in an envelope. He would date it, sign it with instructions. When you find this, bring it back to me. This allowed him to do two things. One, he knew which drivers were doing the inspections. He also knew how long it was from the time he placed it in one of these areas until it was discovered. Some of the results were a little bit alarming. It could have been weeks, but this is a great example or way of showing, one, how to qualify this is getting done, and two, to start engaging employees to actually do it. Obviously, as soon as folks found out there were certificates for things, they went above and beyond. They even started searching each other's truck. So, and you see, I like my quote from Benjamin Franklin: "Tell me and I forget, teach me I remember, involve me and I learn." So I think one of the things we can talk about here with training is, yeah, you can have a presentation and stand up and show the PowerPoint and talk about it, say how important it is you do it, but where's the rubber going to meet the road? How are you going to make sure that that gets across? I did some training with Jordanian Customs years ago, and same thing. We took them out into the field with trucks, and some of us put things in different areas to see, teach them how to learn to actually do the examination. Very effective. It makes people want to do it. Makes people interested in understanding how important it is. Again, not only to satisfy CTPAT, but this is for safety and operational efficiency that this training has to happen. So just a creative way someone used to engage and get this done. I did want to take a second to kind of pause. I saw a question from Albert, great question, regarding business partners and how far do I have to go when I have a partner who might subcontractors, a double brokerage, which remember, CTPAT does not like that. How far do I have to go with the questionnaires are involving? That's a great question. I'm going to give you the answer you're probably not going to like. First of all, is CTPAT and CBP are going to hold you responsible for anything that happens with your goods, no matter what truck or rail car or container it's in. They're going to say it's your supply chain, it's your responsibility. So when you engage a provider and that provider subcontracts or sublets to someone to do functions on their behalf, your responsibility may not be to give that other entity a questionnaire, but ensure that your provider is using some kind of procurement processes equal to yours to engage that secondary or third provider. And again, I know this makes it more difficult, but CBP is going to seize the goods, no matter who was driving it or what the excuse is. So it's important that your providers understand they represent you, not just themselves. So as you engage them and as you say, hey, if you're going to sublet, if you're going to double broker, if you're going to do things, it's me. You're taking my goods and you're possibly risking them to this other provider. So make sure the ones you engage with are reputable. I just wanted to throw it in. That was a good question. With that, Sean, I'll turn it back to you. I think you got comments on seals coming up.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And just further to that, the double brokering issue. It's amazing. So many CTPAT companies that we speak with, a lot of them really do not have a level of awareness to the amount of double brokering that is occurring in their supply chain. So I really want to stress how important it is that you are aware of any of that activity happening in your supply chain, because it's definitely part of your risk assessment and it needs to be part of your mitigation to the risks identified through that. So, okay, so we talked about the container inspections, now you've got your empty container. You've conducted your inspections. You've determined that there's nothing funny with the container. Now you're going to load your cargo into the container. And now what is the next critical step and what requires proper training is related to the high security seals. So essentially that training needs to cover kind of three broad areas: how to apply them physically, right? So just how to handle and apply them, how and when to conduct the VVTT, view, verify, tug, and twist process that CBP promotes. And then as applicable, because this may not be applicable to every supply chain, is the storage, inventory, and disposal of those seals. So again, just like in every example, not every employee will need to be trained in this topic or the entirety of this topic. For example, shipping personnel, they'll need to know the steps related to sealing a loaded container, while receiving personnel need to know the steps for verifying, reconciling, and breaking the seal of a loaded container. Of course, depending on your operation, both sets of staff may need to be trained on both sides of this process as they participate in both aspects. I can remember vividly conducting a validation on a trucking company along the northern border years ago. And the owner sort of, I don't know what the best word is, probably, the most accurate word is probably obnoxiously. I remember he obnoxiously said to me, it's easy to open those high security seals. All you need is a pair of bolt cutters. Yep, I'm well aware of that. I can't tell you how many thousands of high security seals I cut with bolt cutters during my uniformed portion of my customs career. But to me, this is a perfect example of lack of training, because yes, bolt cutters are a master key for opening high security seals, but that's not the point. The point of a high security seal is its tamper evidence features. So the ISO 17712 seals, which is what the CTPAT program requires, and the AEO programs around the world require, they're designed to provide clear evidence if tampering has occurred. And once the seal is applied and locked, any attempts to forcibly open or tamper with the seal will leave visible signs of damage or alteration, indicating that the container may have been compromised. Not every time a seal has an indicator like that means that the container was compromised. Sometimes seals I've seen this happen a lot. A seal or container will arrive with a different seal number. The company was not aware or prepared to accept a container with a different seal number. Somewhere in the supply chain, the communication protocols fail, and there was a legitimate reason that the old seal was broken and a new seal was put on, and that may have involved customs officials. Actually, that's quite common. But the bottom line is that it can indicate that there's been some kind of issue, and this is what should heighten your awareness and should sort of initiate those security protocols that you have in place. So going back to this gentleman, clearly he was unaware of the intent behind the ISO 17712 seal requirement, which is to identify tampering. And if your intention is to ensure that the doors cannot be easily opened, then there's other security devices out there. There's a lot of companies that make security devices that will significantly reduce the ability to even get through a door. That's a completely different situation. That's not what we're talking about here with seals. So your relevant staff needs to understand the intent, which will support their motivation to follow the critical VVTT steps. By the way, kind of a funny story about the VVTT, CBP, an acronym itself, and all the acronyms that CBP owns and the broader U.S. government acronyms. You would think that there was some kind of clever, think tank put together to come up with this, but actually it came from a supply chain security specialist that, like, in the moment, he was explaining how to look at the seals and check for these things. And he simply just reached out and grabbed the seal and said, you should view and verify the seal for any evidence of tampering, and to make sure that the seal number matches your paperwork, and then like give it a good tug and a twist and make sure that it hasn't been mechanically altered. That turned into what we have, VVTT. I don't think there's any money in the copyright for VVTT, but maybe a missed opportunity. We'll see. Time will tell. Anyway.
Hey, Sean, if
Yeah.
I could interrupt too.
Please.
Also, I think you bring up a very good point about what a seal is. And you're absolutely right. The ability to protect a container 100%, that's not the point. The seal contributes to an overall process, allowing to identify when a load may have been tampered with. So I think that's something that we have to, that's why we ask for seal numbers on bills of lading. That's why we ask for inspections of seals in advance. It's all part of an overall process to ensure the integrity of the conveyance. It's understood completely. It's not 100% going to stop it. But
Right.
I think you make some good points. Sorry, I couldn't keep my mouth shut.
No, it's fine. I think you know, when we talk about CTPAT, it's kind of a microcosm of CBP's layered enforcement strategy. So CBP doesn't find that one security solution fixes all the problems or mitigates all the problems. It has all these layers, CTPAT being one of them. And then within CTPAT, there's all these security layers. Not one of them is going to fix the issue, but the combination of all of them provide a level of security that is sufficient. So anyway, these seals, even with their security features, they still get compromised and cloned. And that's all critical information to include in your training curriculum, right? So you want to make sure the staff is aware that, hey, yeah, this is also not a perfect science either. And so, you know, just like understanding how containers are compromised, relevant staff need to understand how high security seals can get compromised. So we all need to understand why we were doing something so that we can be motivated to do it. Again, I just keep repeating that, but I think that's a really critical part of the training, particularly around these aspects of the program, is understanding why behind it, not just the what. So again, from a training perspective, your relevant staff, they need to be equipped with both the proper physical tools and the informational tools to be effective. And finally, any tabletop training on inspections should be accompanied by a practical exercise to ensure that the training was effective. Ron's example was a perfect example of that. Like, how do you test the system? Apparently, you have to test the system by offering up gift certificates for free meals, but whatever you have to do. And then here on this slide are just some key reminders. We're going to provide these along with a longer list from different sections of key reminders. But just some good takeaways here. Security inspections, and this goes to my kind of layered concept. Ideally, they should be performed in an area that's controlled by CCTV, so that you can go back if there's an incident. You can go back to that recording and put together the story, figure out what happened. Based on risk, management should perform random searches on conveyances after the assigned staff have completed the inspection. I think Ron also mentioned that in his example. That completed inspection sheet should be part of the shipping documentation package, ideally. And then the consignee should receive that packing documentation prior to receiving the merchandise, right? You want to make sure that they're aware of what is on the way, the seal number and the container number, and what to expect. And if there was any issues during that search that may have indicated something, you want to make sure that they're aware of that. Okay, over to you, Brad. I think you're next.
Sean, if I could stop again, just taking advantage of a natural break. And Brad, sorry to cut you off. I was leaving some of these questions for the end, and then your seal discussion just sparked creativity in the audience, and so there were a lot of questions that came up. I think you guys answered a lot of them specifically regarding to seals, but I want to just back up a second. And there were a couple outlier questions, and I'd like to just take a minute right now. We're a little over an hour in, to just maybe address some of these, particularly, and I would open this to the panel, not just for you, Sean. There were a couple of questions at the beginning that I think are worth discussing. One, and you guys could probably go on for hours about this, or you could just answer it very quickly and want to move on. But Sean, I'll start with you, given that you've worked both in the CTPAT realm, the broader international CBP realm, and also in the international air cargo realm. A question came up is basically, how does CTPAT interact with other agency programs? The question was more related to known shipper with TSA, but I think, you know, your thoughts, and I would ask Brad and Ron as well, you know, how you see those programs coming together, how they leverage each other, and maybe touch a little bit on the relationship with AEO and MRA. Again, that question you probably could go on for hours about, but I trust that you'll be succinct in it.
Well, I think there was about 6 questions there. Okay, let me try to address them. So first of all, how does CBP, CTPAT specifically, I think, work with other agencies that may be involved in particular supply chains? Officially, they probably don't work that well with them. There's a lot of challenges with that. So that's not a knock on the CTPAT program. Ron mentioned in his opening statements about how CTPAT's not really not regulatory, whereas when we're going into known shipper, regulated agent, known consigners, all of that stuff, it's highly regulated by the ABSEC authorities. Specifically for CTPAT, they do work with and have had a long history of officially working with TSA on the overlap of CTPAT air carriers that are also inspected by TSA inspectors as part of those requirements. So there is an official cooperation there that really the end result of that is it reduces the number of audits that a particular company has to go through. So they try to align the CTPAT efforts and the TSA efforts so that there's only one agency going to a particular facility. That formally exists in the EU AEO model within the legislation. There's a requirement for customs to work with other government agencies, particularly in the context of aviation security initiatives like those we previously mentioned. So there are efforts out there, and there are official operations that occur and memorandums of understanding between agencies, but it's not perfect. I wish it was better. I know Brad, Ron, and I, all of us, when we were sitting in the director chair, this was an issue that came across the desk often. And all of us at some time met with different agencies to talk about it, whether it was FDA or TSA or you name it. It's a challenge. So I don't know if that answer provided what somebody wanted.
I think it does, Sean, and I'll revise my own question to talk about AEO if we have time at the end. But I think one thing it highlighted, and I'll see if Ron and Brad want to add anything, but I think one thing your answer highlights is something that I even mentioned at the beginning, and all of you have touched on it in your discussions, which is, you know, this is not it's a voluntary program, and there's no hard and fast rule on every single thing you do, and it's voluntary at the end of the day. So what you spend your time doing in your engagement with the government, you know, in this case with CBP through the CTPAT program, but applies to other programs as well, is you're trying to demonstrate that you're doing the best you can in your supply chain to be able to secure, to be aware and to secure that supply chain. And these other programs, while officially may not be, you know, talking to it and saying, you know, hey, you're a known shipper, you're automatically CTPAT, or you're in this program, you're automatically in CTPAT. with a good working relationship with the supply chain security specialist, they can be indicators of compliance with certain minimum security criteria and indicators, and actually you're getting yourself ready for, showing that you've demonstrated this ability. So it's all part of the same picture. And I imagine it's very frustrating for some of the people in our audience today that don't have that like hard and fast, what do I do? How do I do that? Let's just make it official. But it does provide some help as you're preparing for your validation, as you're submitting your security profile and other things like that.
I will say too that there may not be a direct working together coordination, but for example, the maritime industry, CTPAT is very aware of the MTSA, the Maritime Security Act. So a supply chain security specialist doing a validation of a port or terminal operator or vessel, they have to be in regulatory compliance with the MTSA, stow plans, seal reporting. So that is an awareness where CTPAT won't come in and try to usurp or overreact on that. They're aware of those regulations and guidelines as they perform their duties. So there is an awareness, there is I guess, kind of teamwork. There needs to be, so there's some understanding, and I think that's improved over the years. Sean, you bring up TSA. I did some work with TSA myself where there really wasn't a lot of cohesion initially. Now there's quite a bit of work together. So I think that's a work in progress, but there is awareness.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Awareness, long-standing relationships between CBP and CTPAT, working with sister agencies. But at the end of the day, and this was always the complaint, there's so much overlap, repetition. But at the end of the day, you're still going to have to comply with CTPAT and what CTPAT requires to stay in the program. Similarly with TSA as well. And I think that's just a mindset that companies need to get into. That part of it, one supply chain program for the entire federal government, I don't see that occurring anytime soon.
Thanks, guys. As we transition, Brad, to your topic, before I rudely interrupted everybody in my role as moderator, we are getting a lot. You guys are very much engaged, the audience here. We appreciate it. To the questions that have very specific and really interesting cases, specific individual cases, we'll try to reach out to you. Some of them that I'm seeing come up in the chat. If we can answer them in the course of the webinar, we'll do that. But also, if we can reach out and have a further conversation, we might do that as well. So please keep putting them in there. I'm not ignoring any of them, hopefully. And hopefully we'll be able to get to everybody in due time. So that's the end of my interruption. Brad, back over to you.
Yeah, got it. Thanks, Andrew. So now we're transitioning to people in physical security. Personnel security is probably one of the more straightforward areas. Probably one of the more straightforward areas within the CTPAT program to comply with. Personnel security can be broken down into 3 areas. Really, everything with respect to hiring, the recruitment, the selection, the onboarding of employees. It also involves the continual maintenance of the employee file over the course of their employment with the company. And then termination procedures for employees. Just one caveat, CTPAT goes to great lengths to make it clear that companies can that they need to abide by their home country laws and regulations regarding toxicology checks, the extent of criminal record checks. And of course, we've got to abide by these companies, by the country laws and regulations. But with that said, really what CTPAT is looking for is to require companies to conduct thorough background checks on all their personnel with access to cargo and shipping documentation. It's important that as a part of the process that the company verify previous employment information provided by the candidate, professional and personal references, to conduct financial criminal background checks for those employees who occupy sensitive critical positions. CTPAT doesn't specify minimum timeframes, but probably a good practice is to go back 7 years. As a part of the personnel file, that onboarding process, it's a good practice to create a file for each employee with evidence of the recruitment selection process, contain updated data on the employee, photo, signature, identify the issuance of any computer equipment, uniformed identity badges, also issuance of the code of conduct, code of ethics, supply, social compliance program. And as a part of the onboarding process, what I've seen, many times is the human resource folks will kind of talk about the company culture, basic expectations for the employee. And then the security team will talk about security practices for the particular facility, how to, if you misplace your badge or it's lost somehow, how to report perhaps a security issue within the company. But I think that onboarding process is also just a good time where companies will start to build that culture of security and the importance throughout the entire organization. I think Ron had mentioned brand reputation, right? Being part of CTPAT is for many companies, all companies, I'm sure, it's important to their business reputation. It's important to their maintaining their livelihood, their business. And then with respect to termination, you want to make sure that you document the removal of IT, removal from any IT systems within the company. Make sure you retain identification tags. Usually they'll be shredded, once the complete process is terminated. Return back any uniforms, and that this, the termination, certainly communicated to the proper departments within the organization. And with much of all that we've said regarding throughout the webinar today, you want to make sure this is documented. Expect that your supply chain specialist is going to ask to see your written procedures, and then we'll ask for evidence along these particular lines. So I think now we're going to turn over to reporting, if we could. Incident reporting is crucial within the CTPAT framework. Company CTPAT participants are required to establish and maintain written procedures for reporting security incidents and threats, not only to CBP, but to your supply chain specialist as well. The list you have on the right would be really examples of what I would consider, mandatory reporting requirements. These were all very significant issues that CBP and your supply chain specialists need to be made aware of. You want to have a written procedure that documents how these issues will be reported. I spent a great deal of time on the southwest border, Laredo, Texas. A very involved, well-known process for companies moving through the Laredo corridor to report any high-risk shipments that may be on the way to the border, with identifying information regarding the tractor, the trailer, the merchandise, any manifest information that needed to be. Laredo provides, kind of a hotline to report this information. I'm sure other ports of entry have something similar. That's something you want to work with, probably with your customs broker or folks within your particular port of entry, that make sure that you have points of contact for all of your ports of entry. One of the things that I know companies members struggle with is, aside from these high profile issues, what types of things should I self-report? And there's really not a cut and dried answer to this necessarily. We recommend that you talk to your supply chain specialist and speak with them about what type of information they deem important, that they would want you to report to them. These things are, on the screen are obvious, but just to use an example, and I think Sean had shared this one with me, a company had domestically, someone had went into one of the warehouses where they store their goods, and there had been a theft, and it was I guess a huge robbery. The company wasn't quite sure whether they should report it to their supply chain specialist. In the end, they did. You want to be thinking about that, perhaps cloning a trailer, the breaking of a high security seal once the shipment was isolated and controlled, and reporting that to your supply chain specialist as well. Before I move off of reporting, I'll just kind of a high-level comment regarding any security incidents at your facility, corporate-wide. We want to make sure that these are documented, the date, the time, any identifying information regarding individuals involved, photographs, anything, and further subsequent research that was undertaken, and maintain those incident reports individually, perhaps in your own internal database, because they do become important in the future, perhaps, if you were to have a security breach. It helps identify perhaps trends or to connect the pieces of the puzzle together. So, do be sure to document your incidents and maintain them for further use and investigation. And then finally, just also be sure, when reporting more broadly, if you have a change to your point of contact, you want to make sure that's reported to your supply chain specialist. Or perhaps there's been a change in your organization. You've merged with another enterprise or sold one of the facilities, or there's just been a change in kind of the physical security aspects of a particular facility. Be sure to bring those to the attention of your supply chain specialist. It's going to be important in the immediate term. It helps for communication, and then as a part of your annual security profile review, and down the line with a validation. You don't want a validation to occur, something has changed, and the supply chain specialist not having already been made aware of that. So with that, I think that finishes my points on those two slides. And with that, we're going to turn it over back to you, Ron.
Sure. Thanks, Brad. So talk about access controls. And I know I've preached this a little bit. I'm going to continue to preach it. We're talking about training. We're talking about things that are important, not just for CTPAT compliance, but for the overall protection, safety, and accountability of your employees. That's something that really should be pushed during any training. Hey, why am I in here? Oh, it's CTPAT. Well, there's other things that we're trying to cover to make sure we protect. Access controls is one of them. You see the very first thing there, physical access controls to prevent unauthorized entry. Unfortunately, we live in a very difficult time. There's far too many examples we can use of where this comes into play and where it's important. I'll use one example. It was fairly recently with the FedEx facility in Memphis. A 22-year-old employee who had been terminated came back to the facility, still had his ID, went into the area where security was, tried to enter through. The security guard, thankfully, denied him access because his card would not work. the young man told this guard, hey, I'm just trying to get a paycheck. I need to go see the HR person. He kept trying to push. The guard would not allow him in. He followed the access controls procedures. That's very fortunate. Unfortunately, the individual went into the parking lot and still used a firearm to injure some and kill some people. Case in point, access controls are more than just, hey, where's your ID? They're very important elements to put into play. I know I've said it before how important certain things are, but it's another factor that CTPAT considers very, very important. How are we protecting the facility, not just the cargo and the goods, but the personnel? I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure Sean or Brad can talk about this, when I went on validations, one of the things in person validations, which I know they don't do as much of them anymore, they do just for brand new. We used to do a tour of the facility. And one of the best things to do is walk around and tug on doors, look around and see areas to see how employees are observing the access controls. I can't tell you how many times the door was open because an employee wedged something in because they wanted to go out and take a smoke break. Or you'd see a chair sitting outside of a door that said no entrance permitted because an employee would come out and just catch some air. Or someone had turned off an alarm in the rear of a building so they can enter and access because they were going out far too many times. I can't tell you how many times I saw that. A word of advice as well. And I know this because as a former supply chain security specialist, and I know some of my colleagues now still do this, when they show up for the validation, if they come to your facility, make them go through the procedure for your access control. Kindly ask to see their credentials, make them sign the visitor access log, make them get a visitor access pass. Do not say, hey, welcome, and just VIP them through. That's the worst. It used to really bother me. So make sure, word of advice, full process so they can see what it is that you're doing. You can see some of the things here that are important. There must be an employee identification system of some kind in place. If there are 20 employees, that's not going to be the same as a facility that has 500. So the flexibility of the program allows you to have a unique identification system in place. There must be procedures in place to identify and challenge and address what to do. This is another one that I recently am working with a few companies have had some trouble with. You know, okay, what do you do if somebody's in the premises that you don't know? Well, we have a manager go over and talk to them. I'm not really sure that that's the job of an employee. There should be some kind of SOP or procedure to engage that individual with someone who's qualified, whether it's security personnel or even sequester in place, hide, and get law enforcement personnel. In this day and age, there's too much violence and too many incidents of individuals getting in and getting accosted or taking action. So I think that's something when we talk about this, what's the procedure? What do I do? If I see somebody coming that I don't know who they are, what do I do and who do I tell? Really important. Visitors must present photo ID. Who are they? All visitors. Another story, I like war stories because I'm getting old, but I can never forget, I was at a facility somewhere in Europe and I'm signing the visitor log and I'm giving my credentials, and a gentleman comes in delivering some kind of canisters, and he waves and he walks right through and goes in the door. Here I am signing the log, getting my pass, and I'm like, case in point. And the last one says it, vendors must present ID. I know it's a UPS driver. I know it's a FedEx driver. I know it's Mike or Michelle from the place that delivers. You're still supposed to observe the access controls. That's why they're there. Again, something that CBP and CTPAT really harp on. And I think, in my personal opinion, because of things that are happening, the concern and importance of protecting employees, something that has to be observed and trained and make sure employees. I remember another validation going on, and I walk up to an employee. I said, oh, can I see your ID? And he goes, yeah, I just got it today. They just gave them out today because we knew you were coming. Those are the kind of things that can cause problems. So I won't go off into a lot of stories, but again, importance of making sure we have access controls. I think Sean's going to talk about physical and cybersecurity next.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So for the most part, all staff should receive some kind of general training about physical security aspects of the facility they work in. And most companies do this certainly from a safety perspective, right? They want to make sure that the employees are aware of all of the safety features in a particular facility, emergency exits, and all these things, fire alarms. But really want to make sure that the staff is receiving that training, and it includes security, physical security aspects. Because remember that your workforce is really your first line of defense. And if they're well informed, they're probably going to be your most important and effective security feature that you can have in your whole organization. A good example of this would be, and Ron kind of touched on this, but I'll look at it from the other perspective. So, if a section of your perimeter fence, for example, appeared to be cut or damaged, then let's say one of your staff was near that area while taking a smoking break or just a break for fresh air or whatever it is, then if they received training about the site's physical security, they would understand that the fence should not be cut or damaged, and would be able to identify that particular situation as a potential security risk, which they need to report, which they also should have been trained in, as Brad was mentioning. So, why wait for security to do its rounds, or the head of security to do rounds, when you can have this force multiplier? You can have the staff almost in real time identify some of these potential risks. And you can really apply that example to pretty much every physical security feature in the facility: lighting, doors, windows, gates, parking lots, etc. So just, again, make sure you use your staff as a force multiplier for your overall security posture. Of course, the way you do this is by providing these points in your initial and your recurring training processes. This should not be a one-time event. So let's talk a bit about cybersecurity. I am not going to pretend that I am some type of IT tech, because I'm far from it. I may be, out of my colleagues, the most IT savvy, possibly, certainly more than Ron. I know that for sure. But all that's not important. Quite frankly, from my experience, and I think Ron and Brad probably share this, I feel that most companies are very well positioned in terms of providing IT or cybersecurity related training, because it's a significant threat. Forget about CTPAT. It's a significant threat to a business operation. Most companies have built-in training for this, which is ongoing and includes testing staff through like anti-phishing efforts, etc. What I want to get across here is really that more than any other topic in your training programs, cybersecurity has the most potential to be extremely fluid. So what I mean by that is, you can conduct refresher training today, but then tomorrow some sort of new hacking technique is identified that wasn't included in your training, and your freshly trained staff is now, in need of this additional information. So, in many ways, you could argue cybersecurity training it can almost be a daily exercise. Let me share a personal example that just happened recently to me, which is terrifying. But I recently received a legitimate email from one of my colleagues that is involved in payroll. And the email said, "Sean, here's your direct deposit form you requested. Just fill it out and send it to the payroll office. They'll make those changes." Well, guess what? I never made any request. My colleague had received what appeared to be a very legitimate email request from me. I'm not an IT guy. I have no idea how they did this, but it looked very legitimate. So he took action and sent me over the form that I needed. So imagine that these hackers were trying to get me to voluntarily change my paycheck distribution, direct deposit, to their account instead of mine. It's really amazing the lengths they go to. But the example there is, what do you think happened after that? course, we had to notify the organization, notify our staff, hey, here's another threat out there. Be aware of that. If you get emails like this is what's going on. And this is the kind of reaction that you have to have in place. So tying that to the MSC requirements under trainings, 12.1 of the MSC states that as applicable based on their functions and or positions, personnel must be trained on the company's cybersecurity policies and procedures. This must include the need for employees to protect passwords, passphrases, and computer access. And it goes on to say a robust cybersecurity training program is usually one that is delivered to applicable personnel in a formal setting rather than simply through emails or memos. Understanding, of course, that emails and memos can supplement that formal training and should supplement that formal training. So you have the formal training, and then in between the formal training, you're using memos and emails to notify staff of changes and threats related to cybersecurity, changes in policies related to cybersecurity. So it just the other point I'd like to stress about cybersecurity is, again, I from my experience, I believe that companies, for the most part, are pretty well positioned because of the overall threat. I would just make sure you go through an exercise of looking at the CTPAT cybersecurity requirements, which are quite extensive, just to make sure that your own policies and procedures are aligned with them from a requiring the MSC perspective. Okay, so I think, Brad, I'll go over to you. I know we're starting to get closer on time, so I had one more fun story, but I'm going to skip that one just in case we need a little more time. Over to you, Brad.
Got it, Sean. Yeah, I think we're nearing the end of the substance of the workshop, and I too am conscious on time. I think much of what needs to be said in the next few slides, I'll try to condense it, synthesize it down, and leave a few minutes for questions. Andrew Fairley, in his opening remarks, he mentioned this. CTPAT members need to provide comprehensive training to company personnel regarding security profiles, procedures, and best practices. You expect that your supply chain specialist is going to look to verify that you have a training program in place, that it is comprehensive, that it's documented, it's verifiable, and that it's periodically updated and refreshed. When we were preparing for this session, we identified 16 instances in the security profile questions where training is specifically mentioned. That's a lot, but we have tried to condense it down in today's session for you to the main parts. A few of the points here on the screen, again, much of this we've already talked about. Vulnerabilities, so things like showing the photos of cargo being secreted into containers, showing examples of hidden compartments. A lot of them, I would say most people on the call have familiarity with smuggling techniques, but the broader organization employees may not have that same level of awareness that, hey, bad people can put bad things in our shipments. So providing awareness along those lines. The access control procedures and knowing those, as Ron mentioned, being sure that you cover CTPAT kind of globally in your onboarding requirements for employees to be aware of the importance in identifying anomalies, internal conspiracies, the procedures to follow if there is in fact an incident within the facility, and specialized training for employees in certain job functions. Sean spoke at great length about IT inspections. I know we had several questions there in that regard. But certain departments, certain job functions will require specialized training. If we can move to the next slide. And here we just kind of globally or big picture wise, some of the areas you need to start formulating in your mind for your different departments, what type of training may be needed for those departments, what type of training would be needed for all employees. This list is not all-inclusive. There are many more areas of training, certainly, but you want to think of this holistically throughout your organization, the type of training needed for your employees. The upper right-hand quadrant there, I just did want to mention, takes us a little bit back to business partner screening and risk assessments. But one of the things CTPAT will look to ensure is that you are pushing out the CTPAT requirements to your business partners. Many times this is done in conjunction with onboarding or the initial working with new customers. It will involve sending that security questionnaire that we talked about, and perhaps even sending, I've seen like a collaboration agreement that both parties will work to ensure the highest degree of security, covering the areas that CTPAT asks members to do, to be sure. But you want to show that how you are pushing out the CTPAT requirements throughout your supply chain more broadly. And then think about functions that are going to require specialized training. Think about your drivers, IT and conveyance inspections, and the agricultural inspection that goes along with that. How to detect hidden compartments, identifying tampering of equipment. I think we mentioned, hinges being manipulated, seals being broken. Security personnel need to be aware of, for the devices that you use, the technology you use, they need to be trained up on that. Closed circuit televisions, biometric devices, camera systems to the extent that you use them. How to deal with unauthorized personnel, people on the premises, and how to notify upper echelons within the organization if that in fact occurs. And then the traffic department, as another example, need to be trained on an annual basis regarding identifying suspicious shipping documents that may lead to go back to some of those points we made regarding trade-based money laundering. How to determine the bona fides of the shippers, the routing of the merchandise, any irregular practices, requests for quick turnaround service. All of these that points need to be communicated to the folks in the accounting, the traffic department, so they can identify the high-risk shipments. And if we go to the next one, the far left there, metrics, just be aware that CTPAT is going to require that you do have written procedures in place, that employees are initially trained in security, that specialized training occurs frequently on a yearly basis. You want to make sure that you gather up evidence that the employees have been trained, training logs, sign-in sheets, photographs. I've seen photographs, of employees kind of in a classroom environment receiving the training. These will all help evidence that, in fact, that you are conducting training for your employees. We haven't spoken about agriculture to a great deal, so I'm just going to focus on kind of how to apply, these administrative aspects in the aspect of agriculture. Agriculture security is mentioned in MSC 12. It also has its own security requirement standalone in MSC 8. And it is mentioned in other areas of the minimum security criteria, for instance, IT inspections, preventing visible pests, keeping the facility free of vegetation. So you're going to want to make sure that you identify all areas where the minimum security criteria apply, in this case to agriculture. Sean mentioned the same point with cybersecurity. You're going to want to ask yourself questions. Have all the employees been appropriately trained up? Have we documented that training? Is it being refreshed periodically? And if you can answer yes to those questions, you're going to be a long ways along in complying with, CTPAT's training requirements. And before I turn it over to Sean to take us to kind of the home stretch here, I would ensure that when you're conducting training, make sure that the leaders within your organization inject as to the importance of security. You want that they communicate core message about how security is not just one department, it applies to all of the organization. There should not be any single point of failure. We've put up some best practices. These come from CTPAT materials. Just and I put on screen for you, and afterwards to maybe prompt some thought about what you are doing, what you're not doing, if you fit within these areas. I think Ron's case study, he talked about a perfect example, right, of a company that, as a part of training, place those gift cards in strategic places during the IT inspection process, as an incentive, but to provide some motivation to the employees to fulfill their obligations, their responsibilities as it relates to training. So Sean, I think I'll stop here on this, and I'll turn it over to you to take us.
Yeah, I'll try to make this very short and concise here, but just some updates and changes slides to talk about. So just the first one, monitoring changes to CTPAT requirements. This is it's pretty much self-explanatory, but it's one of the requirements in the MSC that the POCs for your management of the CTPAT program have to be knowledgeable and informed. Very easy way of doing this is attending the annual conference. I know it sells out, it's tough to get there in person. Maybe you don't have travel funds. Now they have been doing for the past several years a virtual option. So really no excuse there. You can certainly get the information that you need in terms of those updates. Fentanyl is another thing. Many of you, theoretically, every one of you on the call should have received messaging from the program inviting you to training on fentanyl. And while this is not a CTPAT requirement, it's obviously a huge issue that CBP is battling. They're leveraging every resource they can, including CTPAT. So I would highly advise that you incorporate some aspects of fentanyl awareness into your training, just to be ahead of the curve in case that this becomes something more formal within the CTPAT program. Updating POC information. It is so critical that information remains accurate. Still, to this day, failure to respond is still the #1 cause for companies to get suspended in the program. And by updating that information and making sure that it's current and it's accurate, you're not going to fall victim to CTPAT trying to contact you and it's going into a dead email address, for example. And then finally, Portal 3.0, it's been released. It's not pretty. It's been a lot of challenges with the release. We're all familiar with those challenges in kind of any IT release, but I can tell you that the CTPAT program is working diligently to fix all those issues. But when you have access to this, take this as an opportunity to update your information, your business addresses, your users, your MRA agreement, your Center for Excellence and Expertise information, country of origin information. I've been going through this process for a lot of my clients, and I can tell you that information, a lot of it falls out of date. So this is a great moment in time to be proactive and get ahead of that. So I'll stop there. I know we're bumped up against time. I'll hand it back to you, Andrew, to close things out. Thank you.
Wow, I gotta say, you guys self-moderate better than I thought. I've moderated panels for you guys in the past, and I thought this was gonna be much harder when we all decided to do it. But well done, you got about 2 minutes in. No, just a big thank you to all of you. I think it's pretty evident after hearing you the expertise you bring, and kind of the practical advice that you give. Just a note to the audience, a big thank you to all of you for taking the time with us. Hopefully we've been helpful. I've noticed a lot of really great questions that I apologize we're not getting to every one. There were some specific ones that I think were addressed as the presentation went on. But others, if we have the opportunity, we will try to reach out to you and kind of discuss some of your individual issues. Just a couple of things to close out. Remember, as we started this, this is a process. This is a journey for you guys. There's a lot of nuance to each one of the requirements. And, one of the ideas that we had in doing this was to just help to get your arms around the requirements of the program. And really try to understand where you need to be and how you need to do it. But a lot of it comes from you. You know your supply chains better than anybody. You know your security better than anybody. Don't be intimidated by that fact. But you also know where you're deficient, where you're excelling, and be honest about that, right? I mean, the key to this program is diligence and transparency. So if you're working hard and you're being honest about what you've got going on, you're gonna do just fine, and that's all that really can be expected. Also, remember, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have another webinar next week for those that want to do the course in Spanish, or you have any employees that could benefit from the course in Spanish. We'll be offering that next week. Also, as mentioned throughout this presentation, but just as a reminder, we'll be sending you the slides from this presentation, links to the recordings of this presentation, as well as supplementary material that has been asked for in the questions, also and has been mentioned here in the presentation. So the final thing I'll say in my last 30 seconds is just once again, thank you all so much. I hope we've been a help. It is our desire always to help facilitate the mission that CBP has, but also making sure that everybody's clear on the responsibilities that you all have. It's a difficult balance. You guys are all doing as best you can, and being here is a really, really good step in that direction. So thank you to everybody. Thank you for what you do, and have a great rest of the week. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.